HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Letter by Anthony Sciarratta. Read by Lila, Wynne. Chapter 1. Victor Esposito hadn't slept soundly in years. He always had one thing on his mind, the idea so pleasant in memory, yet still painful. He bore a scar on his heart that was a permanent reminder of what once was, taking in the memory of enjoyment, even though it was followed by pain. The story behind Victor's sadness wasn't a complicated one. He had fallen in love with a woman who he couldn't ever have. She completely captured the essence of his being, inspiring him to be the best version of himself. These feelings were pent up deep inside Victor's heart, only surfacing periodically throughout his life's work. Not a single person knew who this woman was or if she was even real. To the rest of the world, she was only a fable that Victor created and the star protagonist in the books he wrote. There had been many women in Victor's life, but none of them could compare to her. He constantly looked for the tiniest piece of her personality in the women around him. It could have been the simplest thing, something so minute that it could keep his attention for a few seconds longer to keep interest in a conversation over dinner. Some would say that was cruel, but a woman could certainly tell if a man's mind was in another place. He counted the raindrops as they dribbled onto his window. Victor glanced at his clock, noticing hours had gone by, still not being able to properly count the raindrops. It was nearly 1 o'clock in the morning when Victor abandoned the tedious task he bestowed upon himself. Dragging himself out of his bed to look outside his apartment window, he was taunted by the New York City skyline. Every time he looked out into the night, he was reminded of the woman he loved. He knew she was out there somewhere. In this late hour of the night, his phone rang. He glanced at it with anger, tempted not to even bother answering. In a spur-of-the-moment decision, he picked up the phone abruptly. "Yes," he said with a twinge of anger. Victor heard nothing. There was not a single sound coming from the other line. It was almost as if someone was holding their breath. "Hello," Victor repeated. Eva Abrams listened attentively on the other line. She had had one too many glasses of wine. From her bedroom she would call Victor on the first Friday of the month. Eva always felt lonely on that day of the week. She chose to call on nights it rained, because she knew Victor would be up counting the raindrops that fall from the sky. It was his way of trying not to think about her. Eva was desperate to hear his voice, yet never able to work up the courage to speak. She never said anything, and only held her breath, fighting the burning temptation to be heard. Eva glanced at her husband, sleeping beside her, making sure he wasn't awake. Victor moved the phone down towards the receiver. When he heard a heavy breath, he placed the phone back next to his ear and attentively waited for someone to speak. Victor wouldn't dare to think it was Eva who called him, never able to give himself that kind of credit. A nagging voice in the back of his mind told Victor to wait on the line a little longer. Eva finally gathered the courage to say something. As she began to put the words together, her husband rolled over to her side of the bed and grabbed her hand. Eva's husband was a good man. He supported, cared for, and loved her. He was generally known to be an all-around nice guy. He was especially known for being proper, which even showed through his name, Stanley Abrams. Eva frantically slammed the phone down on the receiver. The crash of the phone made his dreamy daze disappear. Stanley turned on the lamp next to his bed and faced Eva. "Who was that?" Stanley asked. "I don't know," Eva replied. "I didn't hear anything on the other line. There was only silence." Stanley kissed his wife. He shut off the lamp. "Go back to sleep, sweetheart," he said. Stanley turned over to his side of the bed, taking more than half the covers with him. Eva turned to her side. With tears in her eyes, she held her breath, as she always did. Eva had a lingering feeling that wouldn't go away. The energy surrounding the feeling was dark and loomed over her like the clouds of a gathering storm. Eva always believed in the presence of demons on this earth. Not the kind you'd see in horror movies, but the kind that keep a person feeling down. The kind of demons that taunt your mind, nagging you. This nagging wasn't so much of a voice or a temptation, but more of a premonition. Victor only managed to sleep for a few hours. At 4 o'clock, the sun still hadn't risen. He threw on clothes that were sprawled out across the floor of his room, not even looking to see if they were clean. He walked outside his apartment door and into the hallway of a pristine apartment building in Manhattan. The hallways were lined with a bright red carpet, and the ceilings were painted with gold. Any person would envy Victor's living arrangements, but he didn't care. Material things never mattered to him because he knew the money he made wasn't going to come with him when he died. The elevator door shone. Victor saw the reflection of himself in the door. With a scruffy beard, messy hair, and a broken smile, he waited for the elevator to reach his floor. Victor realized how unhappy he looked as he desperately wished his life had turned out differently. The sad part is that his life had been an amazing journey thus far. At the age of 40, he had already accomplished so much. Victor was an accomplished author, his first book being a massive hit. A string of successes followed with later novels, leaving the world only begging for more. People envy this kind of success, but for Victor only one thing mattered. Being notoriously impatient, Victor repeatedly pressed the button to call the elevator. The elevator doors opened, and a cool breeze suddenly passed by. A man stood inside who was dressed sharply, almost too sharply for this time in the morning. His hair was greasy, shining off the gold-plated ceiling in the correct lighting. He wore gold jewelry on his fingers that matched his olive tan. The man held the elevator door open for Victor, who walked inside. The cool breeze became more glacial as the door closed. The man smiled sadistically.
"I know you," the man said. "You're Vic Esposito, the writer."
"Yeah," he smiled. "That's me." The man shook his hand.
"I'm Lewis."
Lewis continued to speak.
"I love your work. Would you mind if I asked you a question about one of your books?"
Victor was always respectful to his readers. There was never a question he didn't answer, an autograph he didn't sign, or a picture he didn't take. He always believed it was important to treat his fans with mutual respect. He was no different from them.
"Sure thing,"
Victor said. Lewis placed his hand on Victor's shoulder. Victor felt Lewis's icy fingertips through his shirt. There was something about this man that made Victor feel uneasy. The dark aura around him felt threatening to his existence. It was almost as if this man could snap his fingers and take away everything that was good in Victor's life.
"You seem to have so much faith in a higher power. I could tell you have a really strong connection with God."
Victor looked at this man, cross-eyed. This was a question he had never been asked before.
"I have faith in God,"
Victor replied confidently. Lewis laughed. Victor could sense his doubt. Lewis was dangerous, but Victor was not afraid. Lewis was the kind of man who was able to smell fear, preying on people who lacked faith and those who didn't believe in God watching over them. No matter the circumstance, Victor had faith God would guide him through it.
"You sound really confident," Lewis said. "Are you sure there's nothing God has denied you? Something you really want but could never have? You seem like a guy who always takes the moral high ground. How much fun could the moral high ground be?"
Victor looked at this man with disgust as he finally realized who this man was. He was face to face with the definition of evil. Lewis was the reason why humans were flawed. From the beginning of time, he had been tempting mankind. He was the snake in the Garden of Eden, the angel cast down from heaven above, and the temptation of Christ in the desert. "What's wrong with you?" Victor said. "You think you know me? You have no clue who I am or what I've been through." The elevator stopped at the 6th floor. The doors opened, and Louis walked outside of the elevator bank. He turned back to Victor.
"Have a nice day now,"
the man said, smiling.
"I've been around a while. I think I know my way around anyone I come across."
He walked out of Victor's sight, and the warmth returned to Victor's blood. The elevator doors closed as Victor aggressively pushed the button that would take him to the ground floor. Victor fell into a hypersensitive state he experienced when anticipating the worst possible scenario. He was in tune with the universe and his feelings, having a connection with the world others couldn't understand. As an empath, he experienced life with a heightened sense of awareness. Being naturally anxious, he dismissed the feeling as worrisome paranoia. Chapter 2. Manhattan was particularly quiet this early morning. The only sign of life was a newspaper truck driving down an abandoned street. Victor continued his usual morning stroll to a small bodega. The bodega was empty, aside from a young mother walking around with her child. The pair didn't look like they had much, but they seemed content with what they had. Victor watched as the child picked out his favorite snacks for his mother to buy. As the young girl placed the snacks in a small basket, her mother discreetly took them out and replaced them with healthier options. The owner of the bodega lifelessly stood behind the counter.
"The poor kid just wants a greasy and salty snack," Victor thought to himself. "Come on, Ma, you can do better than that."
Victor walked over to a small coffee machine and poured himself a cup of day-old New York coffee in a traditional blue and white paper cup. He took a carton of his favorite whole milk, Farmland dairies, from inside the refrigerator and splashed some into his coffee. Out of the corner of his eye, his attention was drawn to a man entering the store. The man was clearly homeless. His eyes were bloodshot, his arms filled with needle-sized red marks, and his soul weighed down by his bleeding heart. Victor could tell the man was high on something. This was common to see in New York City, or any city for that matter. Victor wondered about this man and what he was trying to forget. He felt for those who suffered from addiction. Victor dismissed the man from his thoughts, but still remained cautious. The milk curdled at the top of his steaming hot cup of coffee. He threw the coffee into a nearby trash can and quickly made himself another cup. He buried his head into the back of the refrigerator, searching for a carton of whole milk that wasn't expired. The woman with her child and the raggedy man waited patiently in line. The woman had finally given in and gotten her child a greasy snack. The woman took the money from her purse and handed it to the owner of the deli. Victor watched as the man behind her desperately stared at the money. As the money hit the palm of the cashier, the man pulled a gun from his belt. He violently grabbed the woman, holding the barrel of the gun against her temple. The barrel of the gun felt cold against the side of her skull. With an icy stare, the bandit threatened to shoot the woman if his demands weren't met. The child cried at the sight of her mother in such a helpless state. "Empty all the money into a bag!" the bandit screamed. "Now!" Victor heard the commotion from across the deli, quickly hiding behind a stack of boxes and slowly making his way towards the front of the store. The owner of the deli nervously emptied the money from the register. Watching the barrel of the gun pointed at the woman's skull, Victor imagined the owner felt that the power of life and death was in his hands. His movements would determine whether or not a child would lose her mother. He filled a plastic bag with money as his hands trembled. The fear overwhelmed him, and the owner accidentally dropped money onto the floor. "Don't move," the bandit said coolly. "Don't fucking move, I said." The bandit pressed the gun against the woman's head, leaving a thick red mark where the barrel met her temple. With her head between his bicep, the man dragged the woman to the corner of the store. The owner slowly put his hands above his head, showing the bandit that he wasn't ready to be a hero. "I'm going to pick the money up off the floor," the owner said calmly. The woman tried to calm her crying child with a soothing voice. "It's okay, baby," she said. "Mommy is going to be okay. Just close your eyes." "Shut up!" the bandit screamed. He tightened his grip on the woman's neck. Victor attentively listened to the conversation as he walked out of hiding with his hands in the air.
"You don't want to do this,"
Victor said. The bandit nervously pointed his gun at Victor.
"No one believes me," the bandit said. "I'm going to shoot someone tonight. Nobody move."
Victor calmly put his hands to his sides, gently speaking to the bandit. "I'll walk behind the counter, pick the money off the floor, and hand it back to you," Victor said. "Does that sound okay?"
The bandit smiled. "Yeah, that'd be fine. Try anything funny. It's not only going to be the girl that dies. No one is going to make it out of here. You'll have 3 deaths on your head, including the kids."
As Victor made his way behind the counter, the bandit watched his every movement. Victor picked up the money, wrapped tightly in a plastic bag, and walked half the distance to where the bandit was standing.
"I'll throw the money over to you," he said. "Let the girl go first."
The bandit laughed.
"Are you really in a position to negotiate?"
"I'm not negotiating," Victor said. "I'm asking you nicely. Could you please leave the girl out of this? She has a child." The bandit tightened his grip on the woman.
"You got balls, man," the bandit said. "I respect that, but I'm not dumb enough to fall for this shit. It's either you hand me the money or someone's gonna die."
Victor didn't trust the bandit. He knew the owner of the deli had called the police with a button he pressed below the cash register. Once the bandit heard the sirens, he would use the woman or child as a hostage to get away from the police. Victor couldn't risk that happening. He would never put either of them in harm's way. No child should ever witness something so horrific. Without a clear plan of action in hand, Victor threw the bag of money to the center of the room.
"Go get the money, then,"
Victor said. The bandit anxiously looked at the money that lay between them. He slowly moved closer to the money, holding his hostage close to his body. As he inched towards the money, the cop sirens rang loudly outside the deli. The bandit could hear the sound of heavy boots marching on the cement as the cops surrounded the store. He improvised and pushed the woman away from him, allowing her to return to her child. The woman shielded her child from the horror that was unfolding by covering her eyes. The bandit grabbed the money off the floor, then aimed the gun at the woman's head.
"You called the cops!" the bandit screamed. "Now I have no way out. If I can't make it out alive, why should she?"
Victor still remained calm.
"No one has to die," he said. "We can get you help. There's always room for a second chance." "Not for me," the bandit said with a smirk.
His eyes raced back and forth between the woman and his gun. He cocked his gun and pointed it at the innocent woman desperately trying to shield her child. Victor could see in the bandit's eyes that he already made his decision. Victor had lived a better life than many, and would never be able to live with himself if he let a mother and daughter die. God had blessed him in so many ways, and it was his turn to give back. An instinctual feeling in the pit of Victor's stomach guided him to make a decision. It didn't take much thinking. One of his best qualities was also his worst. Victor was self-sacrificial. He was always known to be a protector, especially when it came to people who he felt were innocent. In this moment, Victor would finally make the ultimate sacrifice, one most people would never make. The bandit fired his gun, and Victor jumped in front of the woman, shielding her from the bullet. The bullet pierced Victor's skin and struck him in his chest. His body crashed onto the floor as the blow rendered him lifeless. The last thing Victor heard were the screams of a mother and child as the world around him fell black. It was almost a pleasant feeling because, for once, his anxious mind finally stopped running. His body lay on the floor, motionless, his eyes wide open. The blood poured down the side of his shirt, dripping onto the floor. The bandit dropped the gun at the scene and burst through the front door of the store, ignoring the warnings of the police to surrender. Almost instantly, he was shot and killed. The police wasted no time and quickly stormed the store, armed to the teeth. A group of policemen tended to the woman and child, who were still clinging to one another. The woman screamed, begging the police to shift their attention to the man that saved her. She insisted Victor was still breathing.
"That man saved my life," the woman said, crying. "He saved both our lives."
An ambulance was readily waiting outside, having arrived soon after the police reported sounds of a gunshot. Eva, who had finally managed to fall asleep, suddenly jolted to life. A wave of anxiety crashed over her mind, causing sweat to drip down the side of her face. She felt a sharp pain in her chest. Eva had nothing physically wrong with her, but this horrific pain wouldn't go away. She rolled off her bed and onto the floor in silent agony. A few more moments and the pain dissipated. Eva knew that this pain wasn't her own. She carried herself to the bathroom. Eva was surprised the noise she made didn't wake her husband up, as she glanced at Stanley, who was still sound asleep. Whenever Eva was upset, she spent time in the bathroom. The running water masked the sound of her tears. The steam from the shower filled the room as Eva cried hysterically. She sat on the cold tile floor, wrapped in a ball, wanting to scream but not able to make a sound. Eva didn't know exactly what was wrong, but she did figure that it was Victor in pain. The negative feeling that had been nagging her throughout the night finally surfaced. Eva now knew what she felt was a premonition, as the questions poured into her mind, but she didn't know who to call or what to do. The sadness was so overpowering, Eva felt it in her bones. Victor was rushed to the hospital for emergency surgery. Miraculously, he was still breathing, hanging onto his life by a thread. Victor's mind was black, and his consciousness was empty. His body showed no signs of life. Victor was pushed through the various wings of the hospital and put through to emergency surgery. The massive loss of blood had already caused trauma to his body. At this point, the doctors knew they needed to control the damage. His chance to live through this was slim. Even if he did manage to survive, his life would change forever. The police contacted Victor's mother, who rushed to the hospital in a matter of minutes. His remaining family members were either dead or not on speaking terms with him. Barbara was the sole person to contact in case of an emergency. The trauma of the event forced Barbara into a massive hysteria. The hospital almost admitted her until she agreed to take medication. This situation would be traumatic to any person, let alone a parent. Barbara Esposito sat emotionlessly in the waiting room, paralyzed by the medication that numbed her mind. Her tears dried as the tranquilizers set in, draining the emotion. She quietly waited, wondering if she'd ever be able to see her son again. It wasn't long before the media got wind of what had happened. Victor's work was read by millions of people in the United States and around the world. His fans, or readers, were in mourning for a person they felt they knew so well. He put himself and his life experiences into everything he wrote, making almost any story relatable to the average person. It was like his readers had lost a close friend who they knew everything about, having lived through precious life moments together. The media mercilessly hounded Barbara for statements and potential updates. Victor had always felt the news was for people who enjoyed hearing what's wrong with the world. The 5 o'clock news was always filled with depressing stories, which strangely draw people in. Misery does love company, so it would make sense the media would eat up such a juicy story. The news spread, leaving the world holding on to their breath as Victor held on to his life. Eva paced around her kitchen table, repeatedly calling Victor's phone number. Her intuition haunted her. She was desperate to discover the source of this pain. After the 5th phone call, Eva felt faint, plopping down on a couch in the living room of her home. Well known as a minimalist, she was content with a comfortable couch, a bookshelf, and a small television. Although she lived in a beautiful Long Island home, she didn't need much more than what little she had. Eva closed her eyes, taking a deep breath as she tried to rid her mind of this feeling. Victor and Eva had agreed to live separate lives long ago. She knew she shouldn't intrude in Victor's life, but she couldn't help herself from wanting to. Her thoughts swarmed, followed by deep breaths and a sudden cease in her onslaught of phone calls. The painful feeling Eva had in her chest was shackled to her. The feeling was heavy, as if she was trying to drag a large boulder. Eva tossed and turned on the couch, accidentally turning on the television by lying on the remote. The first thing she saw was a breaking news announcement about a shooting in Manhattan. Eva changed the channel because she hated the news, but it seemed to be that every other news station was mentioning the story. While she flipped through the channels, she heard a news anchor say, "Victor Esposito." When she heard Victor's name being mentioned, Eva instantly knew. She placed both her hands over her chest in the same place Victor got shot. For the first time in her life, Eva watched the news like she was playing Clue, trying to find out who killed the writer with a gun in Manhattan. She stared at the television, totally emotionless, with eyes that were drained of their usual bright green glow. Her whole world collapsed in a matter of moments. The man she loved was fighting for his life, and she couldn't do anything but wait. Eva had never expected something like this to happen, and the initial shock hadn't left her mind. She lay on the couch in total denial, barely able to breathe. Eva always thought Victor would be the one losing her first. She had never had an easy life, and because of it, Eva suffered from chronic depression. When she thought back on it, there were parts of her life that could have been considered living nightmares. Because of this sadness that followed her, Eva tended to be a little reckless. Whether it was driving too fast, smoking, or not taking care of herself, Eva exhibited self-destructive patterns. It wasn't extreme, however, and it manifested itself in a subtle way. Victor was one of the few to see through Eva's actions, knowing she didn't want to die, and that her reckless attitude was her way of crying out for help. On the outside, Eva was a strong, independent, and intelligent woman. She truly embodied each of those great qualities, but not many saw her dark side. No one would ever guess she had endured so much suffering. Deep in her heart, she was truly afraid of the world around her. The world was a dangerous place, and she wanted someone to care about her living in it. Eva wanted someone to notice when she did something wrong. But she didn't want that attention from just anyone. Rather, she wished it came from a man who truly would die for her. Eva had a few boyfriends in her life, and none of them took the time to care about her in this way. They never got jealous if another man directed their attention at her. They never thought to ask why she'd suddenly start smoking cigarettes or driving recklessly, when neither was a consistent character trait of hers. These cries for attention were ignored. What Eva wanted was a small reaction. It could have simply been a phone call to check in on her. Eva forced herself to be independent, but there was a part of her that desperately needed to be nurtured. Eva was needy and clingy, but she never wanted to let that part of her show. She feared being pushed away for having needs. Her husband, Stanley, was the definition of stability, and that's what Eva had needed at the time they met. Coming from a life that was so unstable, Stanley was a breath of fresh air. He was truly a level-headed, good-hearted man. He didn't have a vicious bone in his body. Stanley only had one major downfall. He wasn't the most romantic man. He never noticed the little things about his wife. When she'd cut her hair differently, he wouldn't notice. If she seemed a little sad one day, he wouldn't think to ask what was wrong. He never took the time to appreciate how beautiful Eva was, or hold her in his arms and say how thankful he was to be with her. It wasn't that Stanley didn't appreciate her. He just wasn't the kind of man to ask those things. It wasn't in him to be that way. Stanley entered the living room holding a steaming hot cup of coffee, dressed and ready to start his day. Stanley dressed appropriately for his character, even when he wasn't going to work. He donned a button-down, open-collared shirt with slacks. That was his daily go-to outfit. He watched as Eva motionlessly lay on the couch. Stanley noticed she seemed to be in some form of a trance, her eyes glazed over. He glanced at the television, then back at his wife. He could clearly see she was upset about Victor. Still, he didn't think it was actually a big deal. Stanley knew Eva was an avid reader of his books.
"Damn," he said. "I like that guy."
Sample complete. Ready to continue?